If you want to know what a human soul is worth, wait until an old man with a 9-figure net worth starts losing his mind. That's when the vultures stop circling and actually land. For 5 long years, I lived in the suffocating stench of bleach, rubbing alcohol, and dying cells at the St. Jude Premium Care Facility. I watched my grandfather, Arthur Vance, slide into the cruel dark abyss of vascular dementia. To the world, he was the titan who built Vanguard Logistics from a single rusty bucket truck into a regional maritime empire. To me, he was just Papa, the man who raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 10. But to the rest of our family, he was nothing but a massive ticking checkbook that was taking entirely too long to clear. I wiped his chin when he drooled. I held his trembling hand when the night terrors made him scream names of people dead 40 years ago. And while I pulled 18-hour days, balancing remote bookkeeping gigs and data consulting contracts just to cover the medical bills his premium insurance didn't reach, my family was busy shopping for luxury mega yachts. They didn't contribute a single dime. In fact, the moment the doctors signed the official diagnosis of permanent cognitive decline, my Aunt Rebecca used her board position as temporary corporate trustee to freeze the supplemental medical fund. Asset preservation, she called it. A sterile, legal euphemism for letting an old man rot so her inheritance stayed pristine. "He's a vegetable, Kayla," she told me once, her voice dripping with expensive French perfume and unearned superiority as she stood right at the foot of his hospital bed. She didn't even touch him. Her eyes were completely, utterly empty. She just stood there, adjusting the massive diamond ring on her manicured finger. You spending thousands on experimental neurotreatments isn't love. It's financial embezzlement. Don't think we don't see what you're doing. You're trying to position yourself as the saintly caregiver to rewrite his estate plan. We know you're desperate type. Her son, my cousin Jacob, was worse. He was 28, wore custom-tailored Italian suits paid for by company dividends, and hadn't worked a single real hour in his life. He stood by the window, tapping his fingers impatiently against his glass coffee cup, looking at the parking lot. "Let it go, cousin," Jacob sneered, not even bothering to look at our grandfather. "The old man's cooked. You're wasting your 20s playing nurse. Or maybe you're just smart. Maybe you think there's a secret vault somewhere." He laughed, a dry grating sound. They were the textbook definition of greedy heirs, already splitting up an empire they hadn't spent a single day building. I didn't answer them. I kept my eyes on Papa's pale, translucent face. I had learned early on that when you are outnumbered by corporate predators, you don't growl. You watch. You record. You bide your time. By the way, if you want to see how this chess match unfolds, take a second to hit that subscribe and like button. It keeps our story alive. I used to listen to those late-night digital revenge stories and think they were just dramatic fiction. But sitting in that room, feeling the icy weight of my family's malice, I knew my reality was going to be much colder. The financial pressure they put on me was systematic. Rebecca filed an injunction in probate court to strip me of my healthcare proxy, claiming my unstable personal finances were disastrous. It was a calculated lie, of course. My finances were unstable precisely because I was pouring every dollar into keeping Papa comfortable. They wanted me gone so they could transfer him to a low-tier state asylum, slash the overhead expenses, and liquidate Vanguard Logistics before his heart officially stopped. Every day was a grueling battle of corporate paperwork. I had to document every single receipt, every small vial of medication, every nurse's overnight shift, knowing that Rebecca's high-priced corporate attorneys were parsing through my personal bank statements, looking for the slightest discrepancy to slap me with a massive fraud lawsuit. They wanted to break me. They desperately wanted me to sign a voluntary waiver of interest in the estate, just to make the constant harassment stop. But I didn't break. I grew colder. I watched Jacob slowly siphon cash from the secondary operational accounts of Vanguard Logistics, masking them as consulting retainers for his shell companies. I kept a private ledger of my own, a shadow file. I knew it wasn't enough to stop them legally yet. Rebecca's grip on the board was too tight, but it was fuel for the fire I was building in my mind. Then came the rainy night of October 14th. The monitor's rhythmic beeps were shallow, dangerously erratic. The attending doctor had already told me it was a matter of minutes. The fierce storm outside battered the thick glass of the private room, casting long weeping shadows across the white walls. Suddenly, the erratic rhythm of the machine stabilized. Papa's eyes, which had been cloudy and completely unfocused for months, snapped wide open. The milky film was completely gone. They were sharp, piercing, and terrifyingly clear. The brilliant mind that had once conquered the entire tri-state shipping industry was back right here now. He gripped my left wrist with a strength that absolutely shocked me. His skin felt like pure ice, but his physical hold was like iron. "Kayla," he whispered. His voice was a raspy, hollow wheeze, but his words were incredibly precise. "They think they've won. They truly think the entire paper trail is completely clean. Papa, please don't talk, just try to rest," I said, warm tears burning the back of my aching eyes. "Listen to me," he commanded, a violent flash of his old, fierce authority shaking his frail frame. He reached slowly beneath his thin pillow, his trembling, weak fingers pulling out an old, heavy object. It was his vintage silver pocket watch, a rare Patek Philippe family heirloom. The protective glass was deeply scratched, the heavy silver tarnished, and the iron hands were completely frozen at 12 o'clock. It was completely, utterly broken. "They will come for absolutely everything, Kayla. They will offer you a false choice. They will mock you," he heavily panted, his shallow breath hitching painfully in his chest. "Take the watch. Let them laugh. Do not sign a single document for the upcoming corporate restructuring until you sit down with lawyer Vance. Do you hear me? Not a single line." "Who is lawyer Vance, Papa?" "Your main corporate attorney is named Marcus," I whispered, thoroughly confused. "No," Arthur hissed, his eyes turning wide. "Marcus belongs to Rebecca now. Find Thomas Vance, my estranged brother's boy. The black sheep. He knows. When he tells you, open the back." The bedside monitor let out a solid, loud, uninterrupted wail. Papa's grip relaxed. His cold hand slid off my wrist, leaving dark red marks on my pale skin. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. The Titan was dead. The cold game had officially begun now. The mahogany conference table at Vance & Associates, the corporate law firm Marcus ran, was large enough to park a mid-sized sedan. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, baking the heavy scent of expensive leather and stale espresso into the air. Papa hadn't been buried for more than 48 hours before Rebecca called this emergency session. She sat at the head of the table, wearing a crisp, tailored black crepe dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. She didn't look like a grieving daughter. She looked like an aggressive CEO waiting for a corporate quarterly earnings report. Next to her, Jacob was slouched deeply in an ergonomic mesh chair, his manicured fingers flying across the glowing screen of his phone, a condescending smirk permanently etched onto his lips. I sat at the far end of the table, isolated near the heavy glass door. The cooling vent above my head blew an unyielding stream of freezing air straight down my neck. I didn't move an inch. I kept my hands folded neatly over my faded thrift store blazer, feeling the cold weight of Papa's tarnished Patek Philippe pocket watch heavy in my right pocket. It was a physical anchor in a room full of sharks. Marcus entered the room carrying 3 thick, leather-bound binders under his arm. He didn't look me in the eye. He had been Papa's personal attorney for nearly 30 years, but over the last 18 months, his firm's billable hours had been funded almost exclusively by Rebecca's corporate restructuring accounts. A textbook conflict of interest, but in the upper echelons of maritime logistics, conflict of interest just meant additional leverage. He took his seat at the center, cleared his throat dryly, and adjusted his heavy gold-rimmed glasses. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Marcus began, his voice smooth, professional, and completely devoid of any real human empathy. "Given the operational needs of Vanguard Logistics and the pending credit facility renewals with Atlantic National Bank, we need to execute the estate distribution immediately to prevent a technical default on our primary accounts." Jacob didn't even look up from his screen. "Just skip directly to the numbers, Marcus. We all know exactly why we're here. Some of us actually have real meetings this afternoon." Rebecca offered a soft, performative sigh, gently patting her son's arm with her diamond-encrusted fingers. "Jacob, please. Show some respect for your grandfather's memory. Though legally speaking he is correct, Marcus. The board needs a clear chain of command by 5 o'clock today." Marcus opened the first binder. The heavy paper rasped softly against the wood, a sound that felt incredibly loud in the silent room. Pursuant to the final amendment of the Arthur Vance Revocable Trust, dated March 11, the primary residential real estate asset, the $5 million estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, along with all liquid capital accounts held at Chase Commercial, are bequeathed in their entirety to Rebecca Vance Holloway. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, letting out a long, slow breath through her nose. Her rigid shoulders visibly relaxed. It was the distinct relief of a desperate gambler who just realized her massive personal debts were covered. Regarding Vanguard Logistics, Marcus continued, flipping a crisp page, 100% of the voting Class A common stock is transferred to Jacob Holloway, effective immediately, assuming his formal acceptance of the corporate chairmanship. Jacob finally stopped typing. He threw his phone onto the mahogany table with a loud, ringing clack. A wide, predatory grin spread across his face. "Chairman," he muttered, testing the word on his tongue like an expensive wine. "I like the sound of that. I really do." Then Marcus stopped. He looked closely at the last page of the document, his eyes darting toward me for a fraction of a second before looking down. As for Kayla Vance, the room grew completely still. I could hear the faint hum of the city traffic 42 floors below us. Arthur Vance leaves no cash reserves, no real property, and no corporate shares to Kayla Vance. He paused, clearing his throat again. However, under Section 4, Paragraph B, he leaves a single personal item currently in her possession, one vintage silver Patek Philippe pocket watch. Jacob burst out laughing. It was a sharp barking sound that echoed harshly off the glass walls. "A broken watch?" he yelled, leaning forward, his elbows slamming onto the table. 5 years of wiping drool, playing the little martyr, and the old man leaves you a piece of junk that doesn't even tell time? He shook his head, looking over at his mother with pure amusement. "I told you, Mom." He knew she was a leech. Even with his brain completely fried, he could see right through her little act. Rebecca didn't laugh. Her gaze was ice-cold, fixed entirely on my face, searching for a crack, a tear, a sudden scream of outrage. She wanted a scene. She desperately wanted me to lose my mind so she could have security escort me out of the building and validate her narrative that I was just an unstable, greedy relative trying to hijack the family fortune. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I forced my lower lip to tremble on cue. I let my shoulders slump forward, deflating my posture until I looked entirely defeated, small and broken. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out the heavy silver watch, and set it gently on the polished wood. "This is all," I whispered, making my voice sound thin, cracked with artificial despair. "I sacrificed everything for him. I lost my job. I went into massive debt to keep him in that facility." "You did that out of your own poor judgment, Kayla," Rebecca said, her tone smooth as silk, but sharp as a razor blade. "We warned you that his experimental medical treatments were a sunk cost. You chose to play the saintly hero. Now you have a useless souvenir to remind you of your total failure." Marcus slid a thin 2-page document across the mahogany table. It slid smoothly, stopping right in front of my trembling hands. A heavy gold Montblanc pin followed. "Before you can legally take ownership of the personal property item, the watch, the estate requires your signature on this standard release form," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave into a firm, authoritative tone. "It's a routine boilerplate document, Kayla. It simply states that you accept the pocket watch as your full and final satisfaction of all claims against the Arthur Vance estate and Vanguard Logistics, and that you waive any future rights to contest the validity of this will or the trust amendments." I stared down at the document. My eyes scanned the fine print, quickly registering the precise legal phrasing. General release and waiver of liability. It went far beyond a standard inheritance receipt. It explicitly indemnified Rebecca, Jacob, and Vanguard Logistics from any prior, current, or future liabilities, while forcing the signer to completely renounce any connection to the corporate entity's financial obligations. It was a legal iron curtain designed to keep me out forever. "What if I don't sign this?" I asked, keeping my head down, letting a single genuine tear of pure adrenaline hit the white paper with a tiny splash. Jacob snorted loudly, leaning back in his chair. "If you don't sign, we keep the watch, we tie you up in probate court for the next 10 years with lawsuits for unauthorized medical spending. And you leave here with absolutely nothing but a mountain of legal bills you can't pay. He pointed a finger at the paper. Sign the paper, Kayla. Take your little silver toy and go back to whatever miserable hole you crawled out of. You're completely done here. I looked up slowly, letting them see the red rim of my eyes, the look of utter helplessness that they desperately expected to see. I needed them to feel completely invincible. When a predator thinks its prey is entirely broken, it stops looking at the perimeter. It stops checking the bushes for traps. Fine, I choked out, my hand shaking visibly as I picked up the heavy gold pen. I scribbled my signature at the bottom of page 2, pressing down hard enough to indent the carbon paper underneath. I pushed the document back to Marcus. Marcus immediately snatched the paper, nodding subtly at Rebecca. My aunt smiled. They truly believed they had won. They had successfully stripped the troublesome caregiver of any legal standing, securing their massive new corporate empire. Excellent, Rebecca said, standing up and smoothing her dress. Marcus will mail you a copy. Leave the Greenwich house by noon tomorrow. The locks are being changed. I calmly picked up the broken watch, slipped it into my pocket, and left. Once safely inside the quiet elevator, my hands completely stopped shaking. I immediately dialed the hidden personal number. Thomas, I whispered. The trap is set. The autumn rain in Stamford, Connecticut was ice cold, hitting the cracked pavement in heavy, gray sheets that blurred the neon city lights. I sat inside my 12-year-old Honda Civic, the engine idling with a rough, rhythmic vibration that rattled the plastic dashboard. On the passenger seat lay the tarnished Patek Philippe pocket watch, its dull silver casing reflecting the periodic sweep of my windshield wipers. My fingers were still incredibly tingly from the white-knuckled grip I had maintained throughout the entire probate meeting. I pulled out into the slick, bumper-to-bumper afternoon traffic, deliberately heading away from the glittering glass towers of the financial district. I drove directly toward the salt-crusted docks of the old industrial zone near South Norwalk. That was where Thomas Vance kept his private legal practice. There were no marble floors there, no premium espresso machines, no sycophantic receptionists, just a small unpretentious office squeezed tightly between a commercial marine supply warehouse and a loud diesel repair shop. The narrow stairwell of the concrete building smelled faintly of low-tide mud, old paper and machine oil. When I pushed open the frosted glass door marked Vance Legal and Forensic Advisory, a sharp electronic chime sounded through the quiet space. Thomas Vance didn't look a single bit like Marcus. He was 36 with sharp, deeply set gray eyes and dark hair cut brutally short. He wore a simple charcoal crewneck sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his forearms, revealing lean, corded muscles. His desk wasn't polished mahogany. It was an oversized sheet of industrial steel resting securely on black iron sawhorses. The metallic surface was completely buried under towering stacks of bank disclosures, corporate tax returns, and massive whiteboards covered in intricate, blue marker corporate flowcharts. He looked up from a thick forensic spreadsheet, his piercing gaze instantly locking onto mine. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer any superficial, empty condolences about Papa's passing. He simply reached out a steady hand, palm up. "Did you sign it?" he asked, his tone clipped, cold and entirely analytical. I sat down in the squeaking vinyl chair across from him, pulled the document scan out from my blazer pocket, and dropped my phone onto the steel desk. "Exactly as they wanted," I replied, my voice steady, completely stripped of the shaky, broken-hearted cadence I had staged for Rebecca and Jacob. Every single line. Marcus used their standard general release and waiver of liability. Jacob threatened me with a massive probate lawsuit over Papa's past medical expenses if I even hesitated for a second. Thomas pulled up the uploaded PDF file on his dual-screen monitor, his fingers tapping a fast, rhythmic pattern on the mechanical keyboard. His eyes flicked across the complex legal clauses with practiced speed. A cold, humorless smile touched the edge of his mouth. "Beautiful," Thomas murmured, his eyes reflecting the harsh blue light of the screen. "Marcus is a highly capable corporate hack, but his fatal flaw has always been his supreme arrogance. He assumed you were a desperate, uneducated girl panicking over a broken inheritance. By drafting this specific waiver to insulate Rebecca and Jacob from any estate challenges, he accidentally executed the clean break your grandfather required." "Explain the legal insulation," I said, leaning forward. My back was rigid, my focus entirely locked on the technical reality of the board positions. Look at Section 4 Clause C, Thomas said, turning one screen slightly toward me. By signing this, you officially renounced any beneficial interest in Vanguard Logistics and the Arthur Vance Revocable Trust. In exchange, you accepted the personal property item, the watch, as full and final satisfaction of your lineage rights. In the eyes of Delaware probate law, you are no longer an heir, a beneficiary, or an equity holder. You are a legal ghost to that corporate structure. Which means you are completely detached from the impending blast radius, Thomas stated flatly. He stood up, walked over to a small filing cabinet, and pulled out a heavy black forensic accounting binder. He dropped it onto the steel desk with a dull, echoing thud. For the last 18 months while you were protecting your grandfather at St. Jude, Rebecca and Jacob were aggressively re-engineering the capital architecture of Vanguard Logistics. They thought they were being clever. They took out an $8 million asset-backed credit facility from Atlantic National Bank, using the Greenwich estate and the commercial shipping fleet as primary collateral. He opened the binder to a colored corporate flowchart. But they didn't look at the underlying asset valuations. Your grandfather hadn't updated the maritime compliance filings for the hull certification since 2022. He purposely let them lapse. The moment Jacob assumes the formal chairmanship today and signs the bank's mandatory disclosure updates, those hull certifications will trigger an automatic independent audit. The true valuation of the shipping fleet isn't $12 million. It's vastly lower. It's barely $2 million. The boats are legally considered floating scrap metal due to hidden engine block microfractures your grandfather documented privately 5 years ago. I absorbed the data calmly. The pieces of Papa's silent, long-term calculation were beginning to align in the cold reality of the office. So the $8 million loan is technically an immediate, uncurable default the moment the bank reviews the audit. Exactly, Thomas said, his gray eyes flashing with a cold brilliance. And because Marcus structured the new corporate bylaws to give Jacob absolute voting control and full personal indemnity guarantees to secure his chairmanship, Jacob is personally liable for the deficit. Rebecca's Greenwich estate is cross-collateralized against that bank line. They didn't inherit a $20 million empire, Kayla. They just inherited an $8 million financial execution doc. And because of the waiver you signed today, the bank cannot touch a single dollar of whatever you own. Because you have zero legal association with their hallowed corporate dead weight. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with the realization of the absolute ruin Papa had prepared for his own ungrateful flesh and blood. But one critical question remained. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy tarnished silver pocket watch, setting it down on the steel desk between us. The iron hands remained frozen at 12 o'clock, the scratched glass dull under the fluorescent office lights. Papa told me his corporate empire was a hollow shell, I whispered, staring at the frozen face of the watch. He said they would mock me for this. He told me to find you. And he said. Thomas looked down at the Patek Philippe, his expression shifting from analytical detachedness to a profound, quiet gravity. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small specialized watchmaker's tool, a slender bezel knife with a hardened steel edge. He slid the tool across the metal desk, the tip stopping an inch away from my fingers. Open the back, Thomas said. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden surge of adrenaline breaking through my calculated calm. I picked up the watchmaker's knife, its knurled handle cold against my palm. I turned the pocket watch over, locating the microscopic indentation along the rim of the heavy silver case back. My hands were steady now, driven by a cold, sharp purpose. I inserted the tip of the steel knife into the groove, applying a firm downward pressure. Click. The heavy silver backing popped open with a distinct metallic snap. I expected to see gears, springs, or perhaps a tiny folded piece of paper detailing an offshore bank account number. Instead, there was nothing but an empty, hollow cavity. The entire mechanical movement of the luxury watch had been completely gutted. Resting inside the hollow silver chamber were two items that made my breath catch in my throat. The first was a small, rectangular plate made of sandblasted titanium, no larger than a standard postage stamp. Engraved into the dark metal via ultra-precise fiber laser were 24 distinct words. arranged in a neat 4x6 grid. A B39 cryptographic seed phrase. A cold storage recovery key for a secure blockchain wallet. The second item was a tiny, rolled strip of high-density polymer microfilm, secured by a miniature rubber band. Arthur bought 300 Bitcoin in 2011, Thomas whispered, his voice incredibly low. He quickly entered the cryptographic phrase into a secure, offline terminal. The display loaded a balance of $15 million. Clean, private, safe from their corporate collapse. He unrolled the microfilm under a digital microscope, revealing extensive transfer logs proving Rebecca and Jacob had systematically embezzled funds and committed bank fraud. They believe you are a penniless outcast, Kayla, Thomas said. I gripped the hollow silver watch shell, a dark, calculating smile touching my lips. Let them celebrate. Tomorrow we bleed them dry. The grandfather clock in the Greenwich Estate foyer hummed, a low, expensive vibration synchronizing with the steady patter of cold rain against leaded glass windows. By 9 a.m., I had packed my entire life into 3 battered cardboard boxes. I didn't take silver platters, crystal decanters, or cashmere throws. I took my clothes, my laptop, and the hollowed-out Patek Philippe pocket watch tucked securely against my ribs. I placed the copper house keys on the polished marble kitchen island, right next to a fresh bouquet of white lilies Rebecca had ordered for her upcoming victory party. The silence of the house was absolute, a clean, sharp vacuum smelling faintly of lemon wax and betrayal. I didn't look back when I pulled my Honda down the long, winding gravel driveway. In my rearview mirror, a white commercial van belonging to a high-security locksmith was already turning past the iron gates. Rebecca wasn't wasting a single minute to lock me out. I drove straight to Thomas's office in South Norwalk. The room was warm, the air heavy with the smell of cheap deli coffee, and the electric heat radiating from 3 separate server stacks he had set up overnight. Thomas didn't look up when I walked in. He was staring at a glowing monitor displaying a complex proprietary trading interface. The bank received our anonymous regulatory tip at 6:15 a.m., he said, his voice flat and level. Atlantic National Bank's compliance division has already flagged the Vanguard Logistics credit line. The automated system placed a temporary holds verification code on the pending $3 million cash drawdown Jacob requested yesterday. I set my cardboard boxes in the corner and walked over to the steel desk. Jacob wanted that money to settle his margin calls on his tech stock portfolio, I said, leaning over his shoulder to look at the scrolling terminal lines. He promised his brokers he would have the wire cleared by noon today. Thomas pulled a fresh cigarette from a pack, rolling it unlit between his fingers. He's desperate. And a desperate predator is remarkably easy to guide into a choke point. Marcus submitted the formal change of control documents to the bank yesterday. Jacob officially assumed the role of chairman of the board. Along with that title, he signed the mandatory omnibus corporate verification statement. The legal trap, I murmured. The legal trap, Thomas confirmed, tapping a key to bring up a scanned copy of the document Jacob had signed. Look at Section 8. By executing this document without an independent asset appraisal, the incoming chairman personally certifies that all physical assets, including the maritime fleet, are fully compliant with federal hull integrity standards. If the assets are structurally compromised, the loan doesn't just go into standard default. It becomes an active material misrepresentation. Federal bank fraud under Title 18. What's the bank's next move? I asked, watching the data stream. They are sending a senior marine risk surveyor to the Bridgeport terminal at dawn tomorrow, Thomas said, a cold glint in his gray eyes. An anonymous tip containing the specific engine maintenance logs from 2022 makes it a mandatory investigation for their underwriting department. Jacob has no idea the inspectors are coming. Meanwhile, on the top floor of the Vanguard Logistics headquarters, the atmosphere was entirely different. Jacob slammed his fist onto his sleek glass desk, causing his crystal glass of water to rattle violently. Marcus stood across from him, his face unusually pale, holding a freshly printed internal memo from Atlantic National Bank. What do you mean the drawdown is on a compliance hold? Jacob roared, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and burgeoning panic. I signed the paperwork yesterday. The board approved my chairmanship. That money was supposed to hit my trading account 2 hours ago. Marcus adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, his fingers trembling slightly. It's a standard risk management flag, Jacob. They are invoking Section 12 of the Master Credit Agreement. They want to verify the active maritime insurance certifications before they authorize the initial tranche. Then give them the certifications. Jacob snapped, pacing behind his desk, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. We have them in the corporate vault. Marcus, do your damn job and email them the files. That's the problem, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a cautious whisper. I went into the digital archive this morning to pull the active hull logs. Arthur. Your grandfather. He didn't just let the certifications lapse. He filed a formal notice of operational suspension with the Coast Guard back in 2022 for 5 of our primary cargo vessels. The corporate ledger we inherited shows them as fully operational, but the Federal Registry lists them as decommissioned due to structural stress fractures. Jacob stopped pacing. His face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. Decommissioned? That's impossible. Those boats have been moving freight every single week. We've been billing clients millions for those specific hulls. Which means, Marcus said, his voice completely hollow, that Vanguard Logistics has been operating uncertified vessels in federal waters while using them as $10 million collateral for a brand new commercial credit line. Jacob, if the bank discovers this before we can patch the paperwork, it triggers an immediate material default. They won't just freeze the drawdown. They will accelerate the entire $8 million principal balance. And your personal indemnity clause means they can come after everything you own. The door to the office burst open and Rebecca walked in, her face twisted in a mask of absolute fury. She held a black tablet displaying an internal accounting audit. Marcus, what is this nonsense about a private ledger? She demanded, slamming the door shut behind her. Our internal forensic team just flagged an old personal expense report from Arthur. In 2018, he commissioned a custom machining job from a specialized metallurgy firm in Germany. The line item description says, secure silver vault storage container, Patek Philippe modification. The room fell into an immediate, suffocating silence. Jacob stared at his mother, his eyes blinking rapidly as the pieces began to click together in his slow, arrogant mind. The watch, Jacob whispered, his voice cracking slightly. The broken silver watch he left to Kayla. It wasn't a piece of junk. The old man didn't leave her a useless souvenir. He hid something inside the casing. Rebecca turned to Marcus, her diamond rings catching the harsh office light. Marcus, did that little bitch sign the general release form? Yes, Marcus replied quickly, nodding. She signed it without hesitation. She wept, she complained, and she signed the absolute waiver. Legally, she cannot claim a single dime from the corporate assets or the Greenwich estate. I don't care about the corporate assets anymore, Rebecca hissed, leaning over the desk. If Arthur hid his private encryption keys, his offshore accounts, or the real unredacted corporate ledgers inside that watch, she has the power to destroy us. The waiver only protects us from her claiming our property. It doesn't stop her from handing states evidence to the federal regulators if she realizes what she's holding. Jacob snatched his phone off the desk, his thumbs flying across the screen. I'm calling her. I'll buy the damn watch back from her for $10,000. She's broke, she's desperate, she'll take the cash. In the quiet office in South Norwalk, my phone began to vibrate against the cold steel desk. The caller ID displayed Jacob's name. I looked at Thomas. He nodded once, his expression entirely unreadable. I slid my finger across the screen and placed the phone on speaker. Kayla. Jacob's voice boomed through the small office, his tone forced, dripping with a sickening artificial warmth that made my skin crawl. Hey cousin. I was just thinking about you. Look, I know things were incredibly tense in the boardroom yesterday. Emotions were running high, and I wanted to apologize for how I acted. I didn't say a word. I let the silence stretch across the line, heavy and suffocating. On the other end, I could hear Jacob's rapid, shallow breathing. Kayla? You there? He asked, his voice tightening. I hear you, Jacob, I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. What do you want? Look, I know how much Papa meant to you, Jacob said, his pitch rising slightly. And honestly, I feel terrible that you walked away with just that old broken watch. It's a family heirloom, but it's completely useless to you. Talk to Mom and we want to make things right. I'm willing to wire you $50,000 right now, cash, no strings attached. In exchange, I just want you to bring the watch back to the office. It belongs in the corporate display case. For Papa's memory. I leaned back in my vinyl chair, looking down at the titanium plate resting on the desk, the 24 words that unlocked $15 million in untraceable wealth. The watch isn't for sale, Jacob, I said softly. Come on, Kayla, don't be stupid. Jacob's mask slipped instantly, his true volatile nature breaking through the thin veneer of politeness. 50 grand is more money than you've seen in your entire miserable life. You're drowning in debt from his medical bills. Take the money and give me the watch. You sound nervous, cousin, I murmured, my voice dripping with a dangerous, quiet amusement. Is everything okay at Vanguard Logistics? I thought you were the chairman now. Shouldn't you be busy managing your vast new empire? There was a sharp, audible intake of breath on the other end of the line. Then Rebecca's voice broke through, cold and venomous. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. We know what you have. We know Arthur hid his private records. If you think you can use whatever is inside that watch to blackmail us, you are sorely mistaken. You signed a binding legal waiver. You have zero legal standing. If you try to leak a single document, we will sue you into absolute oblivion for corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets. We will ensure you spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary. I stroked the watch's silver shell. I have no legal standing in your burning company, Rebecca. That means I have absolutely no obligation to save it. I snapped the call dead, destroying the card. Thomas smiled grimly, pointing to his screen as the terminal audit logged the bank surveyor's arrival at the docks. The cage door had officially slammed shut on them. The salt air at the Bridgeport Maritime Terminal was thick, biting, and coated with the greasy residue of heavy diesel exhaust. It was exactly 6 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday morning. Thomas and I sat quietly inside his parked Honda Civic, watching through the fogged windshield as 3 white vehicles with Federal Department of Transportation plates and Atlantic National Bank compliance decals pulled slowly past the gated security checkpoint. The harbor lights flickered across the dark, undulating water, casting long shadows over the iron containers stacked high along the docks. Jacob was already out on the slick tarmac. His custom Italian wool coat was completely soaked from the freezing drizzle, his dark hair uncharacteristically disheveled and plastered to his forehead. He was waving his arms wildly at a senior bank risk surveyor, who was holding a rugged digital diagnostic clipboard. Marcus stood a few feet back, sheltering under a massive black golf umbrella, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his leather briefcase. The arrogance that had filled that mahogany boardroom 10 days ago had completely evaporated into the cold, damp morning air. You can't just halt our maritime operations. Jacob's voice carried across the damp concrete, thin, strained, and utterly desperate. This is a private corporate facility. We have 3 commercial cargo ships scheduled to clear the harbor by noon today. Every hour these hulls sit idle costs Vanguard Logistics tens of thousands of dollars. The surveyor didn't even look up from his glowing screen. He clicked a button on his terminal, his expression entirely detached. Mr. Holloway, Federal Maritime Inspectors flagged Hull 4 and Hull 7 2 hours ago, based on unredacted, long-term metallurgical stress profiles submitted directly to our primary compliance desk. These vessels are legally classified as unseaworthy under federal safety guidelines. You use severely compromised, uncertified corporate assets to secure an $8 million commercial credit facility. As of 5:45 a.m., Atlantic National Bank has officially terminated the line now. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cracking as he tried to find a loophole. We can file an emergency cure period petition with the board. There is no cure period for material bank fraud, counselor, the surveyor interrupted coldly, finally looking up to fix a piercing gaze on Marcus. The underwriting department has triggered the immediate acceleration clause. The entire $8 million principal balance is due immediately. Furthermore, the matter has been officially referred to the United States Attorney's Office for Criminal Asset Misrepresentation case, files immediately. Jacob staggered back, his expensive leather shoes splashing heavily into a deep puddle of oily water. The absolute terror on his face was a profound work of art. He was no longer the smug chairman of the board. He was just a terrified, incompetent boy suddenly dumped into a massive federal meat grinder. 10 days later, the relentless rain had finally stopped, replaced by a harsh, blinding autumn sun that offered zero actual warmth to the wealthy neighborhood. I stood quietly on the public sidewalk outside the gates of the Greenwich estate. A large, bright orange legal notice was stapled directly onto the ornate wrought iron entrance. Notice of foreclosure and judicial asset seizure. Because Rebecca had foolishly pledged the primary residential real estate to back Jacob's failed corporate aspirations, the bank's liquidation lawyers had moved very rapidly with a terrifying, absolute corporate efficiency. The massive mahogany front doors of the mansion swung open. Two moving men in heavy gray uniforms carried out a massive, gilded Victorian mirror that Rebecca had always cherished. Rebecca herself followed closely behind them, clutching a single designer leather tote bag tightly to her chest. Her expensive black crepe dress was wrinkled, her face pale and completely stripped of its usual manicured arrogance. Without her makeup and her wealth, she looked incredibly old and ancient. Jacob walked beside her, his head hung low, staring blankly at his muddy sneakers. His phone was completely dead, his personal accounts frozen by a sweeping federal strict asset injunction. They stopped dead in their tracks when they finally noticed me. Leaning casually against the old iron fence, I was wearing a simple, pristine cream cashmere sweater, my hands tucked into my pockets, my posture perfectly relaxed. Rebecca's eyes flared with a sudden venomous hatred. She marched down the gravel driveway, her high heels clicking erratically on the stones. "You did this," she breathed, her voice shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. "You leaked those private structural files to Thomas Vance. You completely and systematically destroyed this proud family's precious legacy. Papa destroyed the legacy the moment he realized you were nothing but a pack of ungrateful vultures, Rebecca," I said smoothly, my voice as steady as granite. "You wanted his wealth, but you didn't bother to check the actual foundation. You were so busy mocking me for a broken watch that you forgot Papa built this empire on logistics. He knew exactly how to move a massive payload, and he knew exactly how to drop a shrewd legal trap." Jacob looked up, his lower lip trembling visibly. "Kayla, please. The heartless bank is seizing absolutely everything. We have nowhere to go. My personal legal retainers are gone. Marcus abandoned us this morning to protect his own law license. You have to talk to Thomas. Get him to drop the compliance claims." I pulled the polished silver Patek Philippe watch from my pocket, its hands frozen at 12. "I bought your defaulted $8 million debt notes yesterday using Papa's true $15 million cryptocurrency inheritance," I whispered coldly. "I own this Greenwich estate now. You have until noon to vacate my property." I walked back to my car, leaving them standing entirely ruined on the freezing wet gravel. The grand family chess game was over. If this dark, twisting journey of strategic justice resonated with your own soul, please consider subscribing and liking. True legacy is never stolen. It is fiercely protected. Until our very next quiet, calculated, and completely inescapable corporate chess move.